Welcome back. My next guest is one of the best trained sea lions in the world. Here we go. Here comes Saki.
Yeah, well, these guys are actually really closely related to dogs through a wolf-like ancestor. So
Really?
They have a lot in common with dogs. The male sea lions make a barking sound. It's like arr, arr, arr.
Can she make a bark?
Yeah, well, her sound sounds more like yelling, but here we go.
Timmy's stuck in the well.
Good, thank you. Stretching.
Stretch.
Stretch a little neck, good. And stretch the back, that's important. Good.
That's very good.
We're gonna stretch out both front flippers. Here we go. There's one, there's another one. Good.
In a world where trust is earned and communication goes far beyond words, one woman has spent a lifetime building extraordinary connections between humans and animals. Today we welcome renowned animal trainer, author and teacher, Dr. Jenifer Zeligs. Okay, so could you give us a brief overview of your background and what drew you into animal training?
I started really early. I loved animals as a child, and my parents started me horseback riding, which is often what you do with a young girl, like 8 years old. And it turned out I had a small allergy to horses, and my mother was an immunologist, and she was scared what would happen if I continued to ride horses. And so she objected, and we had a little bit of a problem. And what she did was, I lived in Washington, D.C., where there is the Smithsonian, the National Zoo, which is a research zoo. We were friends of that community, and there was a class being put on at that time by the new head trainer of the zoo. It was just at the point where people were bringing training into the zoological world. And the idea of the training was for animals to be cared for better, with less force, with less randomness, and with more sophistication. And so she was running this program for the whole zoo, and she was teaching a class on animal training, which was basic sort of, she came out of the marine mammal community, so she came through Karen Pryor type stuff, and she brought this idea of bridge and target training, of developing communication and collaboration. My mother got me into that class. I ended up working at the zoo for 7 years-ish, throughout my entire primary and secondary school. They arranged for me to have part of my education be working at the zoo. So I would leave school and go for 2 periods a day, sometimes certain days of the week, I would go to the zoo and work. And my first job there was to just watch collections of animals, different animals like bears and lions and turkey and wolves, and take notes on their behavior, which was a great thing to learn as a young person, learning to watch behavior, read behavior is how we would put it, across species. So then I started working, I worked with a dog trainer, Able Dog Training, and I worked at a veterinary clinic, so working with vet tech work, and then I went to university, and I by that time I had been going to professional animal training conferences since I was 14. That was my first one. I presented when I was 15 for the first time. And that sounds like bragging, doesn't it? But anyways, I have this ridiculous origin story of animal training, which I think is what the Animal Training 101 book comes from, which is looking across different species and seeing this sort of plurality of options that people in these different fields have, and trying to approach the different kinds of unique problems that different species have, but from a grand unification theory kind of perspective. So I get to university, I start running the mostly marine animal program at UCSC, and I end up doing a psychobiology degree, which is sort of a combination of ethology and psychology. So not this sort of traditional behaviorist viewpoint. And I really wanted to develop into neuroscience, cognitive. I wanted a variety of approaches that went along with the art form of animal training that I had been practicing by that point for 10 years. Because usually you have the practitioner, you have the scientist, and I kind of thread the needle. I know this is a long-winded answer, but I have been doing this a long time. Your entire lifetime, in fact. So, so I kind of, personally, I've thread the needle between the science community and the practical community, and I've thread the needle between the different kinds of species and the different sorts of applications in the way that I have approached my interest in animal training. And along the lines of doing this, I started a school for the people who were taking care of all the animals in my collection, so dozens and dozens of animals. I needed to teach the people how to care for those animals. And so I synthesized the kind of the things I had been learning and going to conferences about, and my own perspective together with the science that I was learning in my PhD and my undergraduate, and I put together what I thought was a sort of a practical but also science-based compendium of techniques, which is what eventually becomes Animal Training 101. And then I sort of fledged off on my own. I developed my own animal care center, which is at a different university, at Cal State University, which is where I still am today, which was horse and dog and seal and sea lion and bird training. And then I sort of ended up teaching people about compassionate animal care. And now we're here. I guess that's...
In your book, you say, "Come bearing gifts." I think that's a great way to frame early interactions with animals. So before teaching or modifying behaviour, how should we approach that foundational relationship?
Come bearing gifts from a scientific standpoint is non-contingent reinforcement. And if you look in the literature, you'll see that there is an enormous wealth of data that suggests that by depositing first, by giving first, you set up. It has a number of features in terms of setting you on the right track, setting you up for success. The animal starts to anticipate in a positive way instead of fear, depending on type of species. I know you work with dogs, and so usually dogs are not going, "Oh no, a human," So it's a little...
Right, but some of them are.
Some of them are, and that will have been because they have a history, probably. But the counter, so it's also a counter conditioning mechanism. So if they have a negative history, non-contingent reinforcement is actually one of the most powerful things you can do. And that, we could deep dive into the nerdy science of why that's the case. But it works with prisoners. It works, trauma-based problems. Non-contingent reinforcement is actually one of the most powerful tools, rather than trying to get something, just giving.
Right.
The spirit of generosity is the way we look at it as a Buddhist. Generosity is one of the principal virtues of actually most ethical interactions. So it has that. It has anticipatory interest. It has counter conditioning if there's an aversive history, and it sets the trainer up, I think, also in the mindset of thinking about what's in it for the animal, thinking about generosity. Now, instead of thinking about, we can get stuck in these agenda things, which is like, I want you to do this, right? And that agenda is, there's something disrespectful or a little bit askew. It's not a collaborative event in that sense. And often people will get so wrapped up in their agenda, they'll forget something has to be in it for the animal. It needs to be, you want it to be mutual. So I guess
that's what it's about. That's it. So you start with gifts, giving, generosity. So if we say the emotions that the animal has to feel for learning to be optimal, so maybe the animal's got to feel safe first and foremost. And then what from there are you looking for in order to say, right, now I'm at the place where learning is going to be optimally received?
I guess one of the things I want to back up, and I didn't answer this very well, I think, is that, so I would describe training as animals learning in human, through human interaction.
Yeah.
Which means that and I think it's a really important concept to get straight. They're wired to be learning from the first moment they encounter you. We're learning all the time. They're, the things we're using in terms of like classical conditioning, opera conditioning, the basic sort of habituation, all of this hardware of, or basic mechanism of learning is there. It's not like it turns on just because you decide now is the moment of training session. So the reality is the animal is in training all the way through.
Say the initial learning that's needed before you go, okay, now I want to start teaching the behaviours that I'm looking for.
You think there's ever a moment like that? So I approach the situation right from the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of all the stuff that I want to prevent in terms of the animal's history. I really want to prevent the wrong thing. So, I wouldn't set my puppy up to pee on the rug. I would preemptively make sure that they had, first of all, a kennel or something like that. But then secondly, a lot of opportunity to go out and pee and praised peeing and all the things that I'm sure, must be more than second nature to you and you understand better than me. But so to me, that would be going on right from the beginning. I would be thinking about that all along and preventing the downside behaviors. Preventing
what I'm getting at more so is, like, let's say you've got a dog in. It's a new dog for whatever reason. It could be a new puppy, but it could be a new older dog or a new animal of any kind that you haven't established a relationship with it yet.
Yeah.
So that's where, like, your come bear gifts. That's the start of. That's a whole other element. That's the start of it.
Yes.
Yes. And then, what else is needed before you go? Okay, now we're at a point where we can actually start really. Obviously, you're thinking about all of the things that you're going to achieve right from the beginning.
I am.
But say. Let's see, how can I phrase this? So, like, what's the learning framework that's needed? That needs to be all of the skills that the animal needs to, say, learn, and how the animal has to feel about you before you go, okay, now we're doing stuff, or do you just start training them right from the get go? And you start training behaviours from, or you try to. Start training the behaviours that you need to teach right from the beginning.
I mean, all learning is individual, so a lot will depend on what that animal shows up with. I would say, and if they show up with a lot of fear, then that would be setting an agenda that I need to create a safe space and make sure that we successfully break down the environmental stimuli in small bits and develop the relationship, minimize the amount of kind of pressure or anything that might worsen the effects of the fear. If, on the other hand, the animal shows up and they're very robust and they're very engaged and they're very excited, then channeling that in directions that are useful really early on, I think is quite efficacious. So things that I would be doing right away with my come-bearing gifts, I would be training my bridge.
Right.
Very quickly, I would be training calm default behaviors. I would be training a way that the animal can get my attention in a positive. So in a dog world, this would be sitting and lying down instead of barking and jumping up. And I would be looking to grab those behaviors where they exist, when they exist, and I would be looking to gently see where the opportunity is for them to be brought up between us as fast as possible, actually. Creating stations like kennels or mats that can be used to differentially reinforce away from things I would be creating those tools right away. I would be also watching out for aggressive behaviors that would be precursors. You know, I don't want your mouth all over me, those kinds of things. I don't want you jumping up on me. I would be working gently around those things, trying not to rehearse them. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. But then as well, like let's take where you touched on the fearful dog, right? You have to, in some sense, establish that a level of trust and rapport with you as the trainer, and for at least the dog to feel safe with you, the trainer.
Yeah.
Before you start saying, hey, let's explore whatever it is that you're fearful of together. And if you've built that trust and that relationship beforehand, then you're going to have a lot more success, I think, there when you start saying, hey, let's look at this together, and I don't know, whatever it is. The dog's scared of. Yeah, right.
Hard agree. Totally.
The dog's scared of the vacuum cleaner. I'm gonna pick up the vacuum cleaner and play with it, and then the dog goes, oh look, I'm gonna come over and investigate with you because I trust you, and so the vacuum cleaner is a great one because I've had so many clients ask me the question of vacuum cleaner. In fact, it's one of the assignments that my students often have to do is detox vacuum cleaners, because I mean a huge percentage of dogs just can't stand them, right? So initially they shouldn't even know what a vacuum cleaner is. Someone has blown them out if they're afraid of a vacuum cleaner. Right.
And you can get that just by whether they sight the vacuum cleaner and are upset, or whether, So assuming you have a brand new dog that has no reason to have known a vacuum cleaner before, the best thing you can do is keep a vacuum cleaner around not doing anything. Feed around the vacuum cleaner, handle the vacuum cleaner, move the vacuum cleaner around, break it into its various component pieces. I'm very careful about that, those scary stimuli. I don't blow the animal out first and then try to repair it. Agreed.
And what is flooding for those who don't know what flooding is?
It's unrelenting exposure to a frightening stimulus until the animal habituates, which is not a guarantee, but generally they will. They will habituate based on the actual aversive properties in the stimulus. So this is like breaking a horse, And the problem is if you make a mistake, so this is the opposite of this is systematic desensitization, where you use successive approximations and break the stimulus strength into small exposure units.
But also not forcing the animal to, say, approach.
It doesn't stipulate your
with systematic,
the overall approach.
So with systematic desensitization, you wouldn't be forcing the animal to endure whatever it is that they find to be aversive, right? Instead, you'd be kind of going at the animal's pace and encouraging them along, let's say.
It's a weird gray area from a terminology standpoint.
Right.
Flooding is technically unrelenting exposure.
Okay.
It's based on habituation, and you will get over something that you're startled by initially. So sometimes people do, go through systematic steps, and you need a little push, and you're just kind of like, okay, you're gonna get over this. Let's just sit with this together for a few seconds, and it'll get better. So that would be kind of this gray area that we're both sort of. But would I recommend that you actually are reading the animal's behavior and trying to stay under the threshold in systematic desensitization? Yes, I would recommend this, and I've published actually quite a lot of work on this subject, so that's how I would approach it. But sometimes there is that little bit of like, hey, let's hang together on this.
Right. Yeah.
So there's some sophistication.
That would kind of fall into flooding slightly, because it's that unrelenting exposure.
Yeah, one hopes that if.
And it's kind of like just push. It's like sometimes you need to just say, hey, let's push you along just a little bit. But of course, with the flooding, there's also the risk. There's the hope that you habituate the animal to whatever it is that they fear, but then there's the risk of them also becoming sensitized to what it is they fear. So.
Yeah. Yeah,
You've
it's
gotta
a
be careful with
dangerous
that.
edge that you're walking. Yeah,
Right.
so this is part of the sophisticated art form. I'm sure you're aware of it in your own experience, and maybe your students are as well. It's there's no perfectly correct way. You're taking a read. You're using your sample size from the past, and you're watching for all the signs that you're reading in the animal's behavior. So in terms of fear, you're watching for avoidance-based behavior, aversive. A sense of aversiveness. And to the extent that the animal is pulling away or pushing away or obsessively, watching with stress signs, those are the kinds of things you want to.
So that's actually, that leads to a good question. Many trainers assume that, let's say, they're walking a dog on a lead and they've got their dog on a lead, and their dog is fearful of something, whatever it is. Let's say it's a wheelie bin, we'll say, a wheelie bin. And trainers will assume, right, if the dog pulls away from that, and then they give in to that, and they allow the dog to pull away, that's going to set their training back. Instead, they need to stay there and they need to go, no, we're going with this. What's your thoughts on that? Is it dangerous to give in to the dog and go, okay, right, we're just going to avoid this for now? When they're, oh no, they want to avoid that wheelie bin a lot in this example, or should they say, right, we're staying here until you decide to move forward?
You don't have any easy questions.
No, it's.
I can't give you a one-off answer. Again, training is individual. What's the life history of this animal? What's the experience you've had with wheelie bins in the past? What else is going on in your day? What else has stimulated that animal? What other stimulation is there in the environment? How much time? How many reinforcers do you have? How bad is the reaction? So both sides of this argument, as you're proposing it, have merit from my point of view. Is it true that if you allowed a dog to consistently run away from wheelie bins and you maintained that process over and over again, let's say you did that 5 or 6 times, would you end up with a problem behavior in that case? Potentially, yes. Because it feels good. It's a negative reinforcement of running away from wheelie bins,
and that lacks in the leash pressure when you move away. Does that play into?
Let me finish the other. I mean, all sides of this would be negative reinforcement to move away from the wheelie bin. But the other side is that there's something in the clean relationship between you and the animal where, depending on the threshold that animal's at, can you get a safe distance from the wheelie bin where you can both be okay, where you can go back to your calm default behaviors, where reinforcement is possible and you can move on, maybe with a respectful distance from the wheelie bin for the sake of the animal, but without the rehearsed fleeing behavior that could infect your future walking. And then the next thing that happens is put a sticky note in your mind that you now need to detox wheelie bins. You may not necessarily need to address that this second, but if you just only avoid wheelie bins for the rest of your life, they're going to haunt you.
Right.
So you now have something you do have to systematically desensitize in a way. And there's lots of good ways that wheelie bins can become positive. So that would be the agenda that you would have going forward. So what you do in that particular moment has a lot of complexity to it. But I wouldn't rehearse running away from wheelie bins, dozens of times. I think that would be something I would be, trying not to do.
But it is that edge, isn't it, of trying to avoid sensitizing the dog in the process of saying, no, we're going to force you to be here when you're really panicked by the wheelie bin, versus saying, okay, we're going to allow you to move away from whatever it is you fear, and then we'll try and we'll approach it again, and we'll see how you feel this time, and then we'll approach it again, and we'll see how you versus just going, right, no, we've got to force you through this.
Yes, I would not
We
tend
can't
to
give
that.
in to your fear response of running away from the wheelie bin.
Agreed. I would not. That would be a big withdrawal and potentially cause sensitization. I mean, one of the big problems with flooding is that if you don't do it until the animal does become habituated, you actually create a sensitized response.
Right.
So it's a dodgy technique. And should be mostly avoided, I think. But there is somewhere in between where, can you get some behavior momentum going and some cooperation going where it's not an either or situation. Can we calmly withdraw? Can we, where's the threshold that it feels safe for you, but we're also together and not just, fleeing mind, avoidant mind. So
Let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. Let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. When you might say stick with a continuous schedule of reinforcement versus an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. What's your thoughts on the whole thing?
I'm going to be so annoying. I'm continuously annoying, aren't I? I don't feel there is a one-off answer to any of this stuff. There isn't.
Not one-off answer, but just like what are some of the benefits of a continuous schedule versus an intermittent schedule of reinforcement?
The classic literature indicates that continuous schedule is very good for identical presentation of behavior. You get more exact presentation, and it's also good for a kind of consistent effort. Those are sort of related. So usually continuous schedules are highly recommended for extremely precise behavior that you need and or brand new novel behavior, which I strongly recommend. Novel behavior on track where the animal is unsure what the behavior is. If they're correct in the behavior, it's a good idea to have that behavior reinforced. There is a lot of weird gray area because the bridge stimulus is technically a reinforcer. And if you don't back up every bridge stimulus, which you don't have to, by the way, and whether or not your bridge stimulus should be on continuous or intermittent is a whole nother subject. But the bridge stimulus itself is a reinforcer. So if you're bridging every response, and most people will end up with body bridges, there will be all kinds of things coming off of you. So it's really hard to purely study
and by bridge stimulus, just to cut in, bridge stimulus is in a signal that predicts the presence of a reward or
a stimulus that marks in time when an animal has done something correctly and will receive reinforcement. A reward marker, clicker.
Right.
A clicker is an example of a bridge stimulus. And it pinpoints the moment in time that the animal has done the exactly correct behavior and separates the delivery of reinforcement from the timing element so that it increases or it reduces your latency. And latency is a huge problem in terms of communication of what was correct. People who aren't even consciously using bridge stimuli end up having bridge stimuli, and they usually have a lot of them. Clicker users usually also have a verbal bridge backing up. Like the number of times you'll see somebody click and then go, good. Like it's so common. You tend to react when an animal has done something correctly. You have your own habitual ways of doing that. That will end up as a bridge stimulus, especially in professional trainers. Everything.
So then back to a continuous schedule. So a continuous schedule that gives you precise behaviour that's good for getting very precise behaviour, and then consistent and precise behavioural responses. So intermittent schedules.
So intermittent schedules are good for getting higher effort, increased effort. And variability of the confirmation of the behavior, the different variants on the behavior. So if you actually want the animal to kind of guess something a little bit tangential from where they are, intermittent schedules are much better. You don't want the same precise behavior. You want something a little bit harder, a little bit higher, a little bit further. Intermittent schedules will get that for you, because there's actually a ratio strain that starts to set in. There's this famous thing that you get if you have something on a contingency, a fixed contingency, a continuous contingency, and then you put it on what's called ratio strain, where you stop the contingency or you reduce the contingency. What you get is an extinction burst, because that process of no longer reinforcing a previous behavior is called an extinction event. And what happens is the animal will often try 20 times harder to get the reward. It's the lottery principle. So intermittent schedules operationally develop a stronger drive towards something, because you're kind of almost like scrambling to get, why don't I get that high that I had before? Because of that, they can also be extremely frustrating. They can lead to aggression. So there's no like sort of pure form of the ideal situation. On the other hand, people who maintain, there's a lot of positive reinforcement people who say one-to-one continuous frequencies is the only, or continuous frequencies anyways, are the only way to fly. The problem is that you're going to screw up at some point and fail to reinforce some iteration. You're going to be looking away, you're going to get distracted, and loud noise is going to come into the environment. If you're training a lion and you've put them on a continuous schedule, you could be dead in that scenario. I mean, you probably shouldn't be training a lion in free contact anyways, is not my recommendation. But
I don't think too many people are listening to this are going to be training lions, but that's a good example.
But I mean, I worked with lions for a living. That was what I did. And I mean, sea lions. But also real lions, and you don't want schedule-induced aggression. That's what it's called. When an animal suddenly is like, you promised me. Right. If you're on a continuous schedule, you're promising. You've broken your promise. So the reason for intermittent schedules also is to prepare for real life.
Right.
In some ways.
So then you've got to be slow, let's say, in your transition from a continuous schedule to an intermittent schedule. You've got to be careful with that transition. Yeah. You don't want to just jump from purely continuous to right now we're on this random schedule of reinforcement. Yeah, it's still contingent, so it's not random. It's variable. Right. That's what I mean by the random schedule. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, intermittent is better. There's all these different different terminology. You definitely got to be careful with the. Well, one of the things I really like about, just to go on about this, because you've just spurred me, and I completely agree with everything you just said. I think the other benefits of variable schedules is that you can use differential reinforcement. The principle of differential reinforcement is the idea that the better iteration of a behavior pays more. And you can stack reinforcers on top of each other. So, praise and play and food and the chance to do the thing you really want and, whatever turns that animal on. You can layer all that on top of one another, as opposed to just, here's your treat or whatever, here's your ball throw. Right. So, the ability to stretch, to really highly differential reinforcement schemes is very, very useful, and making the point that, well, that wasn't that good of a iteration, but this, on the other hand, wow, really, really great. So that's another benefit of intermittent schedules, I think. But yes, sophisticated and gentle approximations to move in that direction. And what about starting with an intermittent schedule right from the get-go? In the real world, especially with dogs. I mean, dogs are the grayest area because they're living with you. I mean, you are a reinforcer to most dogs. I mean, most dogs I meet, they come up to me, they're like, wow, it's you, another human, that's so fantastic. That's the huge advantage that we're at as dog trainers, is that we've got these animals that just, on the whole, are very much primed towards connecting with humans. Yeah, and because of that,
that makes this discussion very challenging because just looking at a dog or just talking to a dog is potentially a reward. Smiling at a dog, they're wired to pick up all kinds of things coming off of you. So, is there any non-contingent scenarios with the dog? I'm not sure, and I don't know how important that distinction is in this case because you've got so many reinforcers at your disposal. My guess is that you are almost always in a continuous reinforcement scenario with dogs because just talking to the dog is reinforcing to the dog, petting the dog is reinforcing to the dog. It's hard for you not to be reinforcing to the dog. So when we talk about this, we're more talking about the things we're deliberately adding on top, like I don't know what your favorite stuff is, like throw toys or
playing tug and fish.
Playing tug, right. Yeah. So, I guess because you've got these other reinforcers backing you up, the intermittent contingency on playing tug would not be so risky, is what I would say. If that's a lion, on the other hand, you'd better stick to continuous initially, just to go back to my wheelhouse, and then work gently. So I think in terms of dogs, it's probably a moot point, maybe, or a semi-moot point. Yeah, that's what I think.
What do you think of intermittent schedules of negative reinforcement? Do you think there is any place for that, or?
I think the principles of continuous versus intermittent work the same regardless of the type of reinforcement it is. I mean, in terms of the effect on behavior and whether the individual animal is likely to learn more. I'm not sure if what you're suggesting actually is that some use of negative reinforcement moved into a primarily positive reinforcement schedule of learning. That's not what
I'm saying in the same way that you would use positive reinforcement intermittently, you'd be utilising negative reinforcement intermittently.
But without any positive reinforcement?
Whether there's positive reinforcement or we'll say without any positive reinforcement for this. It's still contingent upon behaviour.
It's the same, and whether or not what's happening intermittently is positive and negative or just negative, the principles, the scientific principles as I understand them are the same. They do different things, continuous versus intermittent. You're trying to form behavior in both cases. Anytime you say reinforcement, you're trying to form behavior. As opposed to punishment, so if you were using punishment...
On an intermittent schedule, that's
kiss of death. Kiss of death, punishment on an intermittent schedule. It's like the worst use of punishment. Yeah.
So that's an important point about punishment then, is that the consistency in your application of punishment is far more important than even maybe the intensity.
In terms of its efficacy?
Yeah. If you're going to incorporate training punishment into your training, then
I think
you have to make sure that you're consistently applying that, and really not.
It's one of the problems with
not sometimes punishing the behaviour and then sometimes not. You see that a lot, of course, in training.
And here we're talking specifically about positive punishment because negative punishment is intrinsic to the use of positive reinforcement. You can't. So there's a pairing with, and I'm sort of assuming your listeners understand what these terms mean.
Yeah, my listeners definitely understand these terms.
So positive reinforcement.
I don't get.
So take that.
Yeah.
Positive reinforcement. What happens if an animal does not do what you'd like? You don't give them the reinforcer. Then that's negative punishment. So positive reinforcement goes with negative punishment. They're linked contingencies. You can't have them they set up automatically. And the same is true for negative reinforcement. Positive punishment is the inherent result of the negative reinforcement contingency. When an animal refuses something in that you're trying to negatively reinforce them through, what happens to them is the aversive is there and punishing the behavior that they're exhibiting. So they receive positive punishment. So positive punishment and negative reinforcement are linked, and negative punishment and positive reinforcement are linked. So that's just the psychological literature that goes back to Skinner. And there's kind of no way to separate those things because you have to have a reaction, right? And
so let's dive into that actually. So how would you say what's the difference in your mind between negative reinforcement and positive punishment? Because of course they both involve aversive stimuli, but what operationally is the difference between the two?
anytime you use the word reinforcement, you're trying to form behavior. So negative reinforcement is you put an aversive at the front end of the antecedent side of ABC, antecedent behavior consequence. So the aversive, in the case of a negative reinforcement scenario, comes in at the front end to drive a behavior you want to see happen. When the behavior occurs, the operation of the behavior is to lessen the aversive. And that may be both through the behavior itself, but also through the trainer's actions. The most critical thing in negative reinforcement is to lessen the aversive as soon as the behavior is occurring. Punishment, on the other hand, comes in as a consequence. Punishment is at the C point. So negative reinforcement negative reinforcement happens at an antecedent side, happens before the behavior. Punishment happens as a consequence to stop behavior. So punishment means that behavior reduces in frequency. Something is a positive punisher if it as a consequence to behavior, it reduces its behavioral frequency in the future. So the same stimulus, an aversive stimulus, could be applied to cause a behavior that lessens it, and that's then in that scenario it's called a negative reinforcer, or it could come into as a consequence to bad behavior as a way of halting and reducing that behavior in the future. Did I answer it?
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's so.
This is like the sex education conversation of animal training.
That's it. So
unpleasant.
With negative reinforcement, I suppose at least for me, the difference and what is distinct to it, and the same for punishment operationally, is that it's escapable by the animal. And whereas say with punishment, it would be the polar opposite. And this, yes. So what's your thoughts on that way of conceptualizing the two operationally? One being escapable, the other one being inescapable. Both, I would say, ideally being avoidable. I mean, you could have non-contingent punishment and you could have non-contingent negative reinforcement, but that's certainly not optimal for any training. Both ideally are avoidable, but negative reinforcement should be escapable, and punishment being the polar opposite, inescapable. Do you think that would be an accurate way to conceptualize it?
I'm digesting the way you're looking at it, and I do kind of, I understand where you're getting at. I mean, technically, when you apply an aversive in order to cause a behavior, which is what you'd be doing in negative reinforcement, whatever was just happening is getting punished.
Really?
ABC, it's going on continuously. So whatever the animal was doing when you implement an aversive, that's why negative reinforcement is a tricky technique, because in some sense you're always applying this aversive. The animal has a kind of living fear that the aversive is going to come in. And
But negative reinforcement can be also contingent upon the animal's behaviour, right? So you can have a discriminative stimulus, you can have a signal, a command. Okay, let's say sit. Sit is our command. And then the dog doesn't sit, and now we use some form of aversive that is escapable once the dog sits. Negative reinforcement can, of course, also be entirely avoidable on the animal's part if there's something that predicts it.
Only after they've learned.
Only after they've learned.
Yeah,
right.
that's the point that we're still in the point where this aversive came in to cause the behavior in the first place. So, agreed, it can be under stimulus control, and the minimal use of the aversive is your goal. And that the animal's behavior shuts the aversive off is very empowering to the animal. In the same way, I mean, just to argue the point from a theoretical standpoint, the successful uses of punishment, and I'm not advocating for this, but from a standpoint where punishment is being used successfully, it's always linked to a positive opposite behavior, where the animal first knows how to perform correctly to avoid the aversive coming in. So they are instructed to do something you want them to do that is opposite of what you don't want them to do. For example, sit. I want you to sit. Sitting pays. Running after the whatever does not pay and may result in some form of punishment. So to use punishment correctly, you wouldn't just come in and start punishing out of nowhere. You would first train the behavior of sitting. You would set up that positive opposite. And then when the animal makes the choice not to sit, and is therefore making a known choice to themselves, that's when the punishment contingency comes in. So in that sense, they can choose. The correct use of this technique would be they could avoid it in either scenario, ideally. You don't just start out using punishment. You start out training a positive opposite, and then the punishment contingency comes in as a matter of choice for the animal. When the animal goes, well, what are you going to do if I don't? And you say, it's not ideal. Maybe let's stack this in this direction. So that's what all the best use of these kinds of difficult and questionable techniques of adding aversives. And I want to just state for myself that I would try to use the least amount of aversives in the animal's life, which would include not exposure to wheelie bins and vacuum cleaners. I want to keep the animal below threshold and in an agreeable state and on the right track all the way through their lives. So prevention more than punishment.
My next question is play versus food reinforcers. Where do you see the benefits and drawbacks of each of those?
I would ask you that question more than me, to be honest.
Well, that's the thing, I suppose. I mean, with marine mammal training, I don't know what does play look like with them and between trainer and marine mammal. I mean, that's a difficult thing to.
In our world. Sorry, I stepped on you there. So most exotic animals, you have to train them to play first. But you do often with dogs too. I mean, I had a dog that would not chase the ball, would not chase the frisbee. I had to go through operantly and train the whole thing, and then that could be used later on in his life.
So how did you go about training the?
I used food.
You used food.
Well, food and praise and petting and layers and layers of positive reinforcement. But
and then eventually that play itself.
I trained it as a behavior. Yeah.
And then eventually the play took off as
addictive.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have got to be careful about that as well.
Why is that?
When you want the play itself to be intrinsically rewarding to the dog, and then you introduce to teach that, you teach it with the use of an extrinsic reinforcer of food. You can, and at least temporarily, you can reduce the intrinsic motivation in that play. But of course, to begin with, there is none. There is no motivation to play with whatever object it is you're playing with. But you do have to be careful not to completely eliminate the possibility of that occurring in the future.
Yeah.
I've seen that quite a lot actually with dogs. They've been trained to play fetch with a food reward, and now they're playing fetch as an obedience behaviour rather than
something.
Actually, we're enjoying playing, and the play can actually be used on its own as a reinforcer, as a reward. So you definitely do have to be careful with that.
I think that's, that is just such an art form. Making sure that you try to give space for the intrinsic nature of the entire dynamic between the individuals to blossom. And I don't think there's a right and a wrong with it. Like some of it is going to be the type of animal that it is, and to what extent are they going to trip over into that being intrinsic if you're very judicious and correct about it. Or skillful, I guess. And something like a sea lion has no chance of learning that without. I have these wonderful videos of one of my sea lion friends who so learned to love playing frisbee that she had figured out how to hit the frisbee out of the enclosure through underneath the doorway. And we made up a game. We decided we would score by getting it past her into the water. And so we tried all these different strategies, and it would just go on for hours like dogs. But this is an animal that was terrified of people and stimulus, and really had to learn how to do this operationally first. So,
I mean, sometimes you've got to take that approach, but it's like minimise that as much as possible. The extrinsically reinforcing something that you want to eventually become intrinsically reinforcing in and of itself. And that's the beautiful thing about play as well, is that play is something that is biologically programmed into dogs and all mammals as being something that is innate and in and of itself. But for some dogs it's more difficult than others, and you've got to really try and light that spark up, no matter how hidden it is in the dog.
I think it's such a wonderful reinforcer, and I would guard it carefully, like you're describing. I think sending it down too much of you don't want anyone's mindset to be just, this is all about work. I think there's also praise. There's other kind of connective energies that can be used in situations where the natural tendency of the individual may not be so loaded towards.
I think the dog's the best way to approach play, typically, is through observational learning. The dog sees you playing with the toy and enjoying yourself, and you allow them to join in on their own, and you try your best not to force the game onto them. Right? It's really important not to be constantly going, hey, come on, play, but you really want to say once a day, every day, okay, let's try it. I'm going to show you how much fun I'm having with this frisbee, this ball, whatever it is. And then eventually the dog shows some kind of interest, and you go, oh, you want to play as well. And then that's probably the best. I think that's the best way to approach it typically.
That's certainly what I tried with this dog that I had that was not interested.
Right.
The number of times I ran back and forth and showed the delight of this darn frisbee and ball, I mean, I can't tell you. Till finally I was just like, you know what, I just have to train this. But I think I approached it effectively the same way that you're describing. Like first, do you naturally want to do this? No. Okay. How about I do it and you just watch, or you can come along a bit, and then after, whatever, so many weeks of that, or days of that, I just went, no, okay, I'm going to train you to carry this. And that was, just in case anyone gets into that situation where the other things don't work, that was a miracle strategy, and that dog would work to play with that frisbee for the rest of his life. I never had to teach him to catch it. He was just a frisbee dog thereafter once it...
Sometimes that is exactly what you need. You need some kind of You need to be able to just get it going in whatever way you need to get it going, and then
believe in the dog.
But of course, minimise that as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
That's it.
It's nice if it's intrinsically there. So
my next question is going to be clickers versus verbal signals. What's your preference and why, and what do you see as the benefits and drawbacks of each?
Ready to take your animal training skills to the next level? Jenifer Zeligs Animal Training 101 certification program offers professional, science-based instruction drawn from decades of hands-on experience with marine mammals, exotic animals, and companion species. Whether you're beginning your journey or advancing your career, this program gives you practical tools you can use immediately. Learn from one of the industry's most respected trainers. Visit animaltraining.thinkific.com today.
yeah, so we're talking about reward markers or bridge stimuli, and these are signals that pinpoint in time when an animal has done something correctly and bridge the gap between that moment and when they will receive reinforcement, just to have us all on the same page. And the clicker is the, is a sort of a brand that is out there, where I think most people first came aware of the value of a reward marker. And so they're very bought into it, because once you start using a reward marker, it increases your timing efficiency so much, and the aha for both you and the animal is euphoric. And because of that, I think people can get clicker like religion, in a sense, like it's changed their lives. But it's not the clicker stimulus itself, it's the use of a marker that is changing your life. And what I like about having, pros and cons. The clicker is exactly the same every time you use it. You can't volume it up or volume it down. For me, that's a disaster. I'm out in the open ocean with an animal. I need to be able to go, God! And it has to get there, and then when I'm working on a Hollywood movie set, I can, good.
Yeah.
And, I don't want this same tone all the time. Also, it's a mechanical noise, which a lot of animals initially are afraid of, to be honest. Whereas, there's a relational element using my voice, where if I've already built up, we talked about the Cumberland gifts, build up the relationship bank account, my voice is a component of they already feel comfortable with that. And it's coming directly from me. Another thing is, I could go on, but you have to buy the clicker.
Go on and on.
You have to buy the clicker. You have to have the clicker. Now, what happens if, for some reason, have you ever lost your car keys? Have you ever lost, the moment that you want to grab, scan and capture, just shape a behavior that's existing right there, and you just happen to, have something else in your hand, like a drink and whatever your cookie. Now you don't have your clicker because you've got your one hand down. Another one is, I work with animals that will eat and swallow and steal these things from you. It can be grabbed off of you, it can be ingested. Also, I work with animals where blobs of meat are in my hand, so it's unsanitary. You get the blob of meat on the clicker.
Yep.
So where do people really like it? I think they like it if they video game playing people who really, they feel self-conscious about They feel self-conscious about using their voice. Or they feel, it just feels a little too uncomfortable for them to make a clean and clear signal that's separate from a lot of the other language that they're using. Because you do need it to not blur into, you don't want to be accidentally bridging your animal while having a conversation with William. So if I had a bridge stimulus that sounded just the same, like let's say it was the word sound, and I just said sound, and I'm saying sound now because we're having sound check and there's sound this, and so that would be a kind of a crappy bridge stimulus because it would come up in conversation, and we would accidentally be telling an animal that it had done something right when in fact we were just having conversation. So the advantage of the clicker is that maybe you won't hear that sound very often. Although I had this true life example. I had a kid in a class once that was playing with a tin of like sweets of some kind, and you press the top of the tin of the sweet and it sounds just like a clicker. And so all the dogs in the room are just like, what? There was at a conference is what it was. And here's this little kid just playing with its like chewing gum tin. And so clickers can fall victim to everyday words as well. I use a bridge stimulus that sounds like something that you wouldn't actually say. It's the word good, but it's good. So it's sharp and it pinpoints, and it's not going to come up in normal conversation, but it carries at a great distance. I can modulate its tone. I can go on and on about this. There are differential reinforcement bridge stimuli that you can use. Sorry, I keep talking to the camera.
You talk wherever you want to talk.
Reinforcement bridge stimuli that you can use. So I actually want to encode the information. That was pretty good. That was good. That was great. And I want to use volume to encode that information. So that's what's called the differential reinforcement bridge stimuli, which is that same principle of differential reinforcement that we talked about before, but it's encoded in the volume of the tone, and it pays accordingly. So the lower tone, good, might just be variable schedule. Maybe the animal is reinforced, maybe they're not. Good, might be more or less continuous or leaning towards continuous of some form, but it could just be kind of a one-off. And good, that is going to pay big. That's going to come with lottery, or jackpotting. So I like encoding that information because encoding it at the moment that the animal successfully accomplished the behavior is more powerful than them having to wait to see what the reinforcement contingency is.
So Simon, let's talk about simultaneous conditioning and backwards conditioning. Do you think there's a place for that to be used consciously on the part of the trainer, for them to intentionally utilize backwards or simultaneous conditioning?
And what's your definition of backwards conditioning?
So backwards being the unconditioned stimulus coming before the conditioned stimulus?
Yeah.
And simultaneous being they occur simultaneously.
I was just making sure that you didn't mean backwards chaining. That's what I was... there's this idea of what chaining, how to chain things together.
Still on the classical condition.
I'm not sure that backwards conditioning is a thing. I mean, maybe it is. It's not very well supported in the scientific literature.
No.
Our inclination is to try, but I think it's fuzzy in terms of it as a learning paradigm. So, I have the sense of it being, maybe potentially efficacious in higher order animals that have a real potential to have nested scenarios in their minds. This is a real neuroscience viewpoint, but it requires understanding at a deeper level, so almost like reading into a circumstance as opposed to just kind of using the easy access operant and classical methodology that is kind of handed to all species. So I think the more complex animals probably can learn more in that way, and the less complex animals probably cannot. That's my experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your opinion about this?
What's my opinion? I think that...
Do you use backwards conditioning a lot?
I don't use it at all.
Okay. I'm skeptical it exists. I think it's not a very useful concept.
No.
It reminds me also of extinction. We talked about this earlier. I think extinction is maybe scientifically useful to discuss research scenarios, but in operation, the idea of using extinction, the concept of extinction is you maintain something on a frequency, on a contingency, and then you stop doing it. And from a training standpoint, from a practical standpoint, it's like, what the fuck have you done that for? Like, why were you maintaining something that you're now going to just put on ratio strain? Like, I guess some people do it for extinction burst reasons, but that's a harsh way of learning. And I think if you don't want something to exist, most of the time you use extinction to try to eliminate behavior. If you didn't want it to exist, don't reinforce it in the first place. You don't go ahead and build the behavior and then try to get rid of it by stopping reinforcing it. It's neuroscientifically, it's absurd, because you will have this, as I guess your previous guest may have told you, but neurons that fire together wire together, and short of brain damage, that wiring is there. You will have a return to that behavior come up in the future, potentially. Don't create bad behavior on purpose. That's just,
Yeah. I mean, there's another example of where, really, in this example, it is just purely backwards conditioning. There is no forward conditioning element. And the reasons for this seem pretty obvious to be genetic predispositions as the reason for why this backwards conditioning in this setup works. And the setup is, say, you have a rat in a box, you'd shock the rat, and then, or you'd shock the rat and then you'd throw a hedgehog in afterwards, a toy hedgehog, or some stuffed toy in afterwards after you've shocked the rat. And the rat creates that association. Okay, the hedgehog is what shocked me.
Yeah, poisons work this way too. Like if you've had a poison.
Right there, we go. That's another really good example.
That's hardwired. Yeah. It's almost not conditioning. It's like your system is designed to create that association to keep you alive.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
That's interesting stuff.
I guess there might be specific and very species specific scenarios in which that could be used. And I guess I haven't really explored where those are. The poison is, thank you, because that kicks free that idea. Yeah. There probably are other fixed action pattern situations that the biophysiology or the kind of inherent learning modality is set up to do that. But let's say it's rare.
Going back to our conversation on negative reinforcement versus positive punishment, I was wondering, are you aware of chapter by Asrin and Hulse, Nathan Asrin and William Hulse, or if you know those names at all?
You're going to have to give me more.
Yeah.
I'm not semantic memory is not my strong suit. So.
Yeah, so they wrote this chapter, appropriately named Punishment. They came up with a few things that are important for punishment to be reliably successful, I'd say.
Continuousness.
Right. Yeah. So the three main things that they came up with was immediacy, and that's it. Immediately follows whatever it is.
Agreed.
The second one was inescapability, although they didn't label it that, but that was what they were. That's what they were talking about, but they just didn't use the terms inescapability. And then what was the last one they had? And then, of course, intensity, right? Intensity in that the intensity can't be too high in that it causes, say, involuntary freezing, like from shock, electrical shock, or this involuntary freezing. If it's that high, then no learning is really taking place, or not the kind of learning that you want to occur. And of course it can't be too low neither. It's got to outweigh the motivation to do whatever it is that they're seeking to punish. But those were the three findings that they had. But the most interesting one, I think, is the inescapability, and that was what they deemed to be a operational distinction between positive punishment and negative reinforcement. Was that negative reinforcement should be escapable, and that punishment should be inescapable.
I mean, they're totally different operators. You're trying to create behavior versus trying to stop behavior. So,
like most people would say, hey, I use the aversive once when the dog displays whatever undesirable behavior it is that they seek to punish. I'd use the aversive, and then as soon as the dog stops, I'd stop with the aversive. And then I'd ask the person, well, what's the difference between that versus what you did with reinforcing the sit command or whatever obedience command?
I'm not sure I agree that as soon as the dog stops, I don't know that that's necessarily true.
So what I was getting at there is really people's answers to both those questions is we apply the aversive as soon as what we want happens. We stop the aversive. And that's what most people's answer is to those questions, and that's exactly what the Asrian holes would challenge, is that actually no, the difference is that with the negative reinforcement you would turn the pressure off.
Not necessarily with the punisher.
But not with the punisher, if you want the punisher to be reliably effective.
Agreed. That seems obvious to me. Yeah.
Well, you'd be surprised. That's really not obvious to a lot of people. That's really not obvious to a ton of people, and that's where so many people in the dog training industry struggle severely with the application of punishment, and being successful in that.
It's sort of on that same idea of the continuous. I mean, I think it's built into some of these other elements. The fact that it is continuous, immediate is a component of continuous, and this other issue is another component of continuous. So it may be that we're sort of using language labels to describe important elements of the learning experience that slightly overlap because of the way that we're using the language. And there's another principle in here, which is the intensity. And the intensity is a very tricky one because, as I understand it from the literature, and I suspect this is in this chapter, because it seems like we've read the same things. And although I couldn't put my finger on the chapter, the chances that I've read this chapter would be higher. The chances that I've read at least the material that they're using or people's, So,
absolutely.
This is what's known about punishment. The intensity issue has to do with, you actually want to use the highest level that's below the, so you don't want to use the minimal amount of punishment because it quickly habituates.
Right.
So you actually want to.
That's a very important point. That is,
You actually want to use. So people think they're being very, very kind and they're sort of using the smallest amount that they can, but actually what you want to use is the overall smallest amount of punishment, meaning that you want to use it one and done. Or two and done, or whatever it is. You want to try not to have to use punishment over and over again. So you want to effectively stop behavior in its tracks, but then the other side of it is that you don't want to use it to the point where it causes trauma. So it's below it has to be below the threshold of tolerance. Like the animal can tolerate that that amount of stimulus. It doesn't set them, like you use this freeze response, but I think beyond that there's also sort of like other kinds of emotional effects that.
But it's like that freeze. That freeze response would be like, okay, you've really gone way too high now, and that's not going to achieve. Not going to achieve anything.
Right. You need to be below that and below, and we don't have God coming down and telling us exactly what this threshold is, so it's very tricky. But you need to be below their felt trauma threshold, which is very individual. So this is important, but as high as possible related to that. So you want just below that line, so that it makes a strong impact. And the more, basically it has a high salience, and this is true in reverse as well, but you want it as salient as possible, so you use it as limited time as possible. And part of the salience would also be the extension of it. It would mean it would not be instantaneous and over. It's the point is that's a learning moment. You want to make it strong. But not that you want to make it traumatic.
But also you don't want to confuse the animal. And that's the thing with dogs and dog training, is that with dogs everyone teaches their dog lots of different, or a lot of people teach their dogs lots of different obedience behaviours. And some people, they use aversives to achieve that with those obedience behaviours. then when they later go to punish an undesirable behaviour, the dog, say, goes, oh, well, maybe I should sit because I'm feeling an aversive stimulus, and what do I normally do when I feel that? Well, I sit.
Yeah,
And
seeing
then-
it as a cue for a new behavior rather
right.
than a punishment for the
Yeah.
old one. Yeah.
And then that confuses the dog even more, and it's like, okay, well now you've got this dog that's sitting, but they're also still barking at the other dog or something along these lines, and it's very confusing to the dog because you've allowed for there to be that escape pathway within your attempts at punishment.
I think you could also flip this argument around, and it's something that I feel like I want to advocate for, which is the use of aversives has a lot more problems and is a lot trickier than sticking with prevention strategies and positive reinforcement strategies. And you pointing out this confusing element to it is a great example of where a lot of people would just say, I don't want to be involved with that. Or maybe if you're going to want to use punishment, don't use negative reinforcement. Would be another. You don't want to use the same stimulus in both cases.
But even when you are not using, let's say you never use negative reinforcement for anything, now you're going to have a higher chance that the animal perceives that as punishment, let's say.
Agreed.
If you've never used negative reinforcement before and now you're just using punishment, but there's still the possibility. There's still a likely possibility that they think, hey, aversive was applied, then I did this, and the aversive just turned off, rather than connecting it to the behaviour.
No, they will connect it to the behavior, but in that scenario, the aversive isn't strong enough for them to mind. It sounds like, oh, look, I can operate my behavior to avoid this. That's what the animals had. But that isn't a very punishing scenario. That's an animal who's still sort of very much like, oh, this is okay. That's how it's translated in the animal's mind. So that has to do with the intensity issue.
But you could also say that's one reason for why you'd want to make the aversive inescapable, is that it allows you to use a lower level of intensity.
It didn't escape. It experienced the aversive, but it realized, hey, I sat down, and maybe that.
Right,
I guess
that's
the
escapable element where they sit down and it turns, and they either think it turns off or it actually is just a case that it turns off. Right.
I see. So your suggestion is don't make the punisher associated with any behavior that the animal is doing.
And the way to do that being to make it inescapable. In that the sit doesn't turn off the pressure. You have a set duration and a set intensity, and that's the way in which you.
I see your point. This is not an area that I'm inclined to explore very much. I mean, I don't like these tools in the hands of lay people.
But like you say in your book, though.
Doing this.
Like you say in your book, it's good to have as much knowledge about everything.
Agreed.
And then with that, you can decide whatever path it is that you wish to take. But the answer, I don't think, is to say, hey, I'm only going to say learn things that I enjoy learning about, or I'm drawn to, and neglect everything else that I don't want to learn about, or for whatever reasons I don't want to learn about. Rather than it's actually better to have a slightly more holistic approach, and to just look at everything and explore everything to as much as you can. At the very least, theoretically, looking at everything, exploring everything that's written on punishment, as much as you explore stuff that's written on positive reinforcement and positive reinforcement based strategies. And I think in turn that is able to improve your training all around, and that's exactly what you say in your Animal Training 101 book.
I obviously I agree with that principle in general. I think not knowing about something doesn't mean you don't use it. And that's my argument, is that actually you could be a lot of people who claim to be positive reinforcement trainers are actually using plenty of negative reinforcement because they use leashes and collars and halters and all the control mechanisms, and those fundamentally work on the basis of negative reinforcement. And if therefore you have not studied negative reinforcement, and you don't understand its operational precepts, that it needs to stop immediately as soon as the correct behavior, then you're going to be using it wrong. And another place where, and here's an important place to come off of your point, where I think people need to understand punishment, is in all the studies of punishment, the worst possible, the most abusive, all the things that people say come with punishment that are bad, which there are long lists of learned helplessness and kind of horrified emotional responses and difficulty for animals going forward as a result of punishment contingencies. The worst scenarios that you see that is in random physical punishment.
Right. Yeah.
And the place where
non-contingent application, right?
Yeah, random is non-contingent, right?
Exactly,
Non-contingent physical punishment is the most extreme example of where you get all the debilitating negatives and almost none of the positives, because the animal cannot operationalize a choice to avoid that in the future. So not the avoid at the moment, but avoid, the point of punishment is to not behave like that in the future. And if you can't relate your behavior to not have that happen to you again in the future, then what you get is trauma, almost by definition. That is trauma. And that is what most people in the positive reinforcement community are, warning against. And sensitization is another one. Sensitization is a component of trauma. You're now even more worried about everything. Where does that happen in most animals' lives? Veterinary procedures.
There we go. I knew that.
That's
I've
where
read your book. That's why I know about this.
That's where it happens, and even in the most positive reinforcement applications, what you see is people sort of giving themselves a free pass on preparing the animal for their necessary care and just forcing them through, flooding them through. But the animal has no way to understand. They can't operationalize their behavior to avoid it because, of course, it's their necessary care, right? So they're just going to be forced into this traumatic incident. And what ends up happening is that the animals in a lot of those cases are aversive to veterinarians, veterinary clinics, their nails being trimmed, their teeth being cleaned, whatever their thing is, grooming. And that, feeds into a long-term behavioral, maladaptive behavioral phenomenon that results in people probably hiring you. So maybe I shouldn't be talking about this, but
no, you definitely should. This is a problem. This is a really big problem.
This is, to me, the biggest case for first of all, understanding the effects of punishment, understanding that you actually are punishing, taking responsibility for that, and understanding how to maybe work with what you want is a negative reinforcement behavior in this scenario that lessens. You want the animal cooperative and compliant so that the amount of force that they experience is more contingent force and is something that they understand and can operationalize. You can work towards fully voluntary veterinary experiences. And there's no reason you shouldn't. A dog is easier to work with than a sea lion, and I could do everything with my animals voluntarily. So that's the reason to study punishment.
That's a very good point to bring up about the vets. That's a place where a lot of dogs have a lot of issues, and it's completely avoidable if you take the right steps. I mean, what would you say are some of the what are some of those steps that you would take?
Thanks for asking. This is my favorite question. So I think realizing that all animals are going to need medical care in their lives, and you know what that experience is going to be like. You're going to have to go to the vet clinic. There's going to be needles. There's going to be people in white jackets. They're going to have various gear. It's going to smell of other animals. There's going to be alcohol. Start preparing for that early. Don't do that just when they need to go in and have some major problem. So right from infancy, right from childhood, puppyhood, I guess in your particular case, I'd be taking unnecessary trips to the vet for treats and games and play and enjoyment, and I would choose veterinarians that allowed me to come in.
Most vets are very open to this, to allowing you to just come in whenever.
Yeah, and get on the scale, go into the room, have a cookie, have the tech come in, pet the dog, play with the dog, feed the dog, walk out. Nothing's happened to the dog. At home, train the dog to understand pokey things, places. My dogs open their mouth on cue. We can look in there. You don't have to wrestle them to have it happen. Make sure that a second person can do this, so the dog learns, stationing with you ideally, and then someone else, a stranger, can come in and do the look of a veterinarian, which is very, very concentrated. Why are you paying so much attention to me? That increases the salience of a veterinarian. That behaviorally is very off-putting to a lot of animals. So having that associated counter-conditioned as actually a positive for the animal in safe environment, with friends, with people coming up, just making that an everyday event. Add gear with it. They usually have things that they put in or poke on. Just start adding, everyday stimulus into the environment that's going to come and touch your animal.
You can turn that into what would you say? Turn that into a conditioned stimulus for reward.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, desirable circumstance, or at least.
That's one way you can get your dog used to getting poked with things. Is turn that into a signal that predicts reinforcement.
Yeah. So the whole thing should be counter conditioned, which means eventually it will be classically conditioned. So first it's aversive and it's moved to neutral, and then from neutral it moves to attractive, and so. That's the process you're running, and having that second person come in and be able to do that, grabbing the various places, right from infancy, playing with the nails, clippers that are going to touch the nails, or whatever you use, like those sanding things, or whatever process you're going to use.
The amount of dogs that have come to me and the owners say, "Oh, we've got to knock the dog out in order to do their nails," and I'm like, "Why?" And obviously, if they teach the dog, "Hey, the nail clipper is a good thing and it's enjoyable." And that's really not difficult to do. So
there's a big chapter on systematic desensitization and how to break your stimulus down into small enough parts so that you can detox it.
In Animal Training 101.
In Animal Training 101, the desensitization chapter.
Well, I'm going to start bringing some of the points out of Animal Training 101. I had some pages and bits that I've got marked. This one looks good. Communication and motivation. Directing behaviour in any individual comes down to two fundamental principles. One, explaining what you want done, and two, convincing your subject to feel the same way. This philosophy stems from the idea that an individual within their capability will fail to do something for only two reasons. The first is that they do not understand how to do the thing, and the second is that they do not feel entirely convinced to do so. So it follows by this logic that there are two tasks animal trainers must master. The first is to be able to explain what it is we want the animal to do, and the second is to convince them to do it. Mastery of these two components and the associated techniques will result in success regardless of the underlying process. So
yeah, that's the basic framework that I teach in, because I break the techniques down.
And motivation being more important than but significantly more important than communication.
Significantly, yeah, because there's a lot of different ways you can communicate. Well, actually, no. An animal who wants to try to figure out what you want will do so whether you're explaining it well or not. And the reverse is you can be great at explaining something, and if they don't care, it falls on deaf ears.
Right.
Yeah. And in motivation, I would put desensitization, which is competing motivators. So reducing fearful stimulus, or even attractive stimulus, which happens a lot more in the dog world. So distractions or fears. The desensitization would be to drive those kinds of things towards neutral. So that's in the category of motivation. And then aggression, which is the specific category. I line item it out because it screws up a lot of, especially exotic animal relationships, but an animal who thinks that they can get what they want by threatening you,
right,
threatening harm to you, creates a hurdle for the trainer that I propose that issue needs to be addressed first, because you can't kind of avoid and allow that to develop as a rehearsed behavior pattern. So I would say, if there's an aggressive problem, address that first. If there's a fear or distraction problem, address that. And those are often overlapped because you can get aggression from fear. And then if there's a basic question of motivation, like, do you want this? Do you want that? That's the next level. And worry about your, which technique you're going to use. Are you going to use manipulation? Are you going to use targeting? Are you going to use scan and capture? That stuff is very much lower on the totem pole of your decision making in terms of approach. This wasn't your question, though, I think. Was it your question?
I don't think I had a question. I think the question. I was just reading from your book, and I thought that was a brilliant section of your book. I just reread that on the train over here today, and I thought, that's a good way of putting it. You're a very, very elegant writer.
Thanks.
Right. So let's see. Let's go to page 72. I'm just going to spoil your book for everyone. I'm going to read the whole thing to everyone on the podcast. No,
Unlikely?
I don't think so. So, blocking. Explain blocking.
Blocking is where one stimulus has so much salience that any other type of information falls on deaf ears. A lot of people used to say, for example, that you've had one bridge stimulus, you couldn't have a second one, because the animal, the salience is the importance of, or the value of. In neuroscience, it would be valence. Anyways, and in Buddhism, it's Vedana, by the way. There's a lot of different ways people have to point at the same truth. So if there's one ring that rules them all, one God, you believe in something so strongly that it obscures any other idea coming in. It does turn out, though, by the way, you can train multiple bridge stimuli. I usually have 3 with my animals at minimum.
And what's the reason for that?
Why do I use more than one?
Yes. And you're saying you're using more than one for the same unconditioned stimulus, so the same. For your reward signal, you're using more. You're using
it's not by type of reward.
Right.
It's not. I mean, you could.
It's not. Hey, I'm using one for punishment, one for this, one for that. It's.
Well, these are all bridge stimuli, so they would all indicate reinforcers, but they don't. They indicate reinforcer generically. Oh. Whatever reinforcer I'm going to give, it's not specific to the particular bridge stimulus or reward marker.
Okay.
So the stimulus association is always, like, you could never have a reward marker that indicated punishment.
Right.
That would,
yeah, of course.
But a reward marker could be associated with a whole variety of different kinds of reinforcement, and it just generically means good. Or it could be associated with very precise, this reward marker goes off and means you're going to earn this, and this, I don't find that very
And you
useful.
have 3 reward markers then?
With
reward bridge 2 though.
Yeah, bridge stimuli, and the reason is, so if one it would be tactile usually. So if I'm riding an animal, or if I need a subtle cue, that like in a performance environment or something like that where I can't make a sound, and the animal cannot see me, because if I'm in close contact, I often use a double or triple tap bridge stimulus, and then I use a verbal bridge, and then I also, because I've had to work in Hollywood a lot, where you have to be completely silent because there's other stuff going on. I need to, and I'm at a distance from the animal, because that's almost usually the case. The animal's interacting with an actor. I need to be able to give a bridge stimulus that marks the moment, but doesn't disrupt the dialogue and everything that's going on. So I usually have a visual, a tactile, and a verbal bridge stimulus.
Right. I get it. Okay, so
Not that everyone needs that. That's just for example.
so
But
then
to get past the blocking
going back
effect,
to blocking,
to get past the blocking effect, you really have to up the salience of the second. It's a lot harder to train the second bridge than it is to train the first bridge, because the animal's not looking for more information of that. You can rub them together. Actually, you can deliver them 1-2. That's one way you can do it. Or you can use a sort of a higher reinforcement package, so that the salience of this stimulus goes up. So it's a jackpotting when you first present it, and then you go back and forth in the 2 stimuli both. So you understand the word yes, the word good, the word You can, as long as all those things all mean correct.
Right.
It's fine. You can have as many of them as you want. And the more the animal starts to realize that there is this capacity to understand more than one signal meaning all the same thing, fine, as long as that pairing is always correct. Anytime you take a signal and you have it mean 2 different things, you're screwed though. So you can't do that.
Right.
The signal always has to mean what the signal means.
Yeah.
So once you get past the sort of first blocking effect, the animal has a broader spectrum of belief, and it's easier to train subsequent ones.
The keep going stimulus. This is one that's particularly in my heritage. So there's all these advanced communication stimuli, and you probably have some that I don't use or haven't got in the book, which I've been asking people to give me more of them. There's a stimulus that infers a concept, a more complicated concept. A reward marker is one. A bridge stimulus is one example of that. But a keep going stimulus is a nuanced form of, whether you put it under the bridge stimulus or not, it's a nuanced form of the same kind of carrying of information. But what it says is maintain the topography of the behavior. So, and you're on the right track. Another way of doing a keep going stimulus is to have something like a hold or a duration cue, which is just an extension cue. Right.
And that is to request extension as opposed to say, yes, you're right. And they do they're a little bit operationally different. The keep going stimulus will have been made through occasional variable reinforcement during continuous behavior, meaning it has to be associated with reinforcement. It is an indicator of reinforcement that says keep going at the current topography and you will receive reinforcement. And the way it gets that meaning is that sometimes there's a reinforcer that comes in at that point. As opposed to a hold, which is usually something that you instruct the animal to do, but does not necessarily have a reinforcer associated with it. It is like you give a hold cue, the duration of 5 seconds is expected before you receive reinforcement, and then you actually increase that 10 seconds or whatever. Hold is the longer you hold this behavior, you're on the right track to reinforcement. It usually given to an animal who's unsure insecure in the behavior. They work very similarly, but they're not exactly the same.
Okay. So the end of session stimulus. First of all, do you have a start of session stimulus? No.
In some animals I do, yeah. Like I'll put on a marker that says,
this is the beginning.
I'm now open for, the food machine is open.
And the end of session stimulus, what do you see as being the benefits and drawbacks of that?
Yeah.
Just briefly.
I like an end of session stimulus because if I'm going to give an animal a timeout, I want them to know that I'm giving them a timeout.
Right. So you're using this in a sense as a negative punishment? A signal?
No, the opposite. It's I want the animal to know that nothing is wrong, and an end of session stimulus is just a stimulus that says, okay,
we're done here.
We're done.
There's nothing that you've done that's
right,
this.
And it usually is followed by reinforcement.
No. Right.
I mean, the best way to do an end of session stimulus is to give the stimulus and give a bunch of non-contingent reinforcement and environmental enrichment and disappear.
Right.
Because you actually don't want it to indicate punishment.
Right.
You don't want it.
So you wouldn't go end of session stimulus and then back into your crate? Let's say if it's a dog, let's back into your crate or back into your pen.
I would put them in the crate because that's a behavior.
Right.
So the session is not over if I'm still going to ask them to do a behavior. Putting them in the crate is a behavior. I would put them in the crate.
Well, it's the end of the training session once you're putting them in the crate, right? If we say their crate is their place where they rest and they stay. And
I guess one of the things. So I didn't finish, but what's important in end of session stimuli is that the duration of the end of session is unexpected or undeterminable. And one of the best ways to detoxify it is to do what I call multiple sessions, which is to go back surprisingly. So yes, the session is over. Oops, no, it's not. I'm right here. Here I go. Bam, we're back. Oh, session's over again. Oh, now I'm back. So that it doesn't imply, oh, the world is coming to an end and I'm not going to have any training for the next 10 hours. I mean, I work with animals in zoos and aquariums a lot, and if you're on a fixed schedule, this can be a real big problem. You can get aggression at the end of session.
Right.
You can get depression and worry. So actually, you want to detoxify that associative history by not having a strong hard off. So usually, I would come and go quite a lot. In the training of this stimulus, so that it just means for now. So I like the word goodbye. It doesn't mean that's it. Sorry, it's all over for you. Hope I see you again someday. You know, like you don't want that depressed feeling. You don't want it to be a delta.
Right. Yeah, it's really important. It's not oh, this is punishment or this is something bad, and you've got to try and, I suppose, minimise that effect of the end of the session to the best of your abilities.
If the animal wants to be with you, it could be a signal of punishment because you are saying negative punishment is here. So we need to detoxify the negative punishment element, and the way that we do that is so in your case, you put the animal up, and then you give a bunch of non-contingent reward as goodbye non-contingent reward, so that actually yes, something is over, but it's not that everything is over. It's not that everything is bad. It's that we're now in a new phase of us. And the second way of dealing with the downside of it is to make sure that the period of you being gone is variable. So you may have just said goodbye and then you come right back. And you may do that repeatedly at different intervals so that you kind of detox the worry that might develop. And maybe other things. It depends on the animal and whether there's like an attachment issue going on there. But
yeah, that's what I was thinking, like with say separation anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah, what's the best way to deal with that?
Well, very much what I just described.
What I just described.
And I think there are other things, which is like, load them up with a lot of exercise before they get into that scenario. What scenario will that animal naturally intrinsically relax? And trying to make that as accessible as possible. So usually exhaustion and, you know, having had a lot of exercise. It's very much harder if they're still wanting. So a little bit of satiation of their sense of reinforcement, what their needs are, and trying to find ways for them to have those needs met in that condition. So there may be other social things you need to do. I mean, interestingly, people have animals watching TV. There can be smells. There can be your smells in that crate. Yeah, and like I said, I think variable periods of being gone. Yeah, and companion
It's a difficult one. I mean,
It's a difficult
separation anxiety, or even containment phobias, or any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's all very difficult, especially when you've got the average dog owner and they're going off to work and they have to go off to work, and they live in somewhere where they need to be able to put their dog. They need to be able to leave their dog at home and their dog be relaxed and safe and quiet. And
there's also chemical interventions you can use to mediate some of the smells in the environment.
Right.
Talking to your veterinarian about that. I think the other thing, like this happened really bad with COVID. I bet you experienced it, where people were like 24/7 with their animals, and they were like, they super intensified
you've got to
the
introduce
connection.
that separation from the beginning of your relationship with the animal. Sometimes we're not going to be together, and sometimes we are.
Yes. Don't set up a long rehearsed practice of intense constancy. Because then when you try to pull it apart, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
So actually you want to build in natural separation into your relationship with your animals right from the beginning. It should be your normal experience for that animal. And avoid building this extreme attachment scenario.
Right.
Even though
when someone comes home with a new puppy, I'm sure you've had many new puppies, and
some anyways, yeah.
Right. What? Obviously, very quickly, if you put the puppy in the crate and you move away from them, or you shut them in another room from you, there's going to be this whining, and screaming, and all the rest of it. What should someone do in that situation? Because there's lots of different ways there's lots of different thinking around how to approach that situation. Some will say, hey, you want to just ignore it and have it completely stop before you come back to your puppy, or just completely ignore it and just go about your day-to-day life and come back. And there's a lot of different thinking there, but how would you typically approach that issue?
I think I wouldn't go all the way into. I wouldn't leave a puppy in a crate untrained right off the bat. I would train the puppy to get into the crate in smaller approximations than you're describing. So I actually would time
or another room or whatever it is. But when the puppy's making those having that response to you being both separated, what should your response be there?
Again, I'd be largely training against that right all the way along. So when I think about getting a puppy, I think, okay, it's a little bit like when you're going to have a child. I feel like you need to have a few good weeks of extra time and energy to put towards that animal's initiation into its life. That is to say, I wouldn't get a puppy and then plan to go to work the next day and just leave the puppy in a cage and go deal with it. That's not something I would do. I would know, this is a good time. I have summer break. I have a few weeks off. I'm gonna set this animal up for its life. And during that time, I would be building all the tools we talked about. I would have the crate in the environment. I would have as big a crate as possible.
See, a lot of people would say you want to have a smaller crate, well, not as small a crate as possible, but a relatively small size crate for toilet training purposes as well. The crate is very often used as a toilet training
fair
aid.
Fair point. I guess, yeah. But the dog that's going to have to go to, I mean, this is just what I did. This is what I've done a couple of times. So you know, the way to deal with the toilet training, which I do think the crate is really incredibly important for that, but is a lot more preventative maintenance. Like we're going out, we're gonna pee, you're gonna get praised for your peeing, or maybe there's mats or whatever, and there's some cues in the environment that set this up, but mostly it's prevention. It's like you're okay. We've done all the necessary stuff, and now you go into the crate. If the dog has to pee, and you leave it for 12 hours, it's going to pee in the crate regardless of the size, you know. So you have to kind of be making good choices about that, I think. Yeah, I guess it depends, but you know, I do not feel that the smallest possible crate would be my first choice. It would work well for the peeing, but in general for the sense of confidence in the crate, I'm not so sure. Maybe there's an in-between. Ultimately, I want the biggest possible crate in the long term for the dog once it's learned how to control its where it's going to urinate. And I guess I'm setting up. What else am I doing? I'm trying to get the dog tired before it's going in the crate. And they do get tired. So, you know, there's sort of more optimal and less optimal scenarios. I'm putting lots of warm fuzzy stuff in there so they feel comforted. And I'm coming back sooner so they don't develop an anxiety disorder associated with it. It doesn't develop into the... Another thing would be, if I hear them whining, that's probably not the time I go up to the crate.
Right.
I try to wait for the quiet moment, if I can. So, you know, there's that.
Changing the value of a motivator. That's an interesting one. So how do we go about doing that? And maybe you might want to say something a little bit about the motivation continuum.
Oh yeah.
With that as well as the changing the value of the motivator.
So I have this construct that I use to just help people visualize when we're talking about stimulus value, the motivational stimulus. You have on one end attractive stimuli, which I generally call reinforcers, although the reality of negative reinforcement.
Right.
Yeah. And aversive stimuli on the other end, punishers. And in the center of this continuum is neutral stimuli. And at any given moment, for a particular individual, a stimulus will fit somewhere on that continuum, but it will not stay fixed. I want to point out, because I think some of the conversations we've had, it's very important to understand operationally the near to neutral stimuli, which I think people are often not really, and I don't think I have this in the book. I have this now in my classes because I really like, actually it's in this book. Maybe I could find it in this book. Yeah. The Mindful Partners. Take a look at that. The motivation continuum.
That's even more advanced than this.
This idea of near to neutral, stimuli that are close to neutral but have either an aversive or an attractive valence, is very important in terms of some of the arguments, I guess, that people have. You know, a lot of the use of aversives for negative reinforcement in particular are actually hover around this near to neutral element. In the case of negative reinforcement, you really do want to use the minimal aversive that you can that will operationalize the behavior, unlike punishment. And realizing that, there is near to neutral or very close.
And then there's that overlap as well, like I think you were saying in some point in your book, between, say, sculpting, physical manipulation and negative reinforcement. And it's like, okay, sure, it falls under the same category, but it's not really the same thing, and it's not perceived by the animal to be the same, right? As say, more compulsive negative reinforcement applications of negative reinforcement, right?
Well, that depends on the how far on the continuum it is, the salience. I mean, if you're using very strong, physical force on an animal,
exactly. There we go.
Is.
But then that's more falling into more traditional negative reinforcement than the physical manipulation, sculpting of, hey, this is the position I want you to be in, and now we reward that, and there we go. I'm just showing you and guiding you into whatever it is that you want to achieve with the animal, right?
For an animal like a dog who likes being touched, it could even be a reinforcer in that sense. I mean, it is what it is. We don't know. It might be very, very modestly aversive, but it also, because dogs like being touched, it's kind of a. One of the things about motivation is it's a soup. It's not a one-off. There's a lot of motivators happening at any given time. Like right now, you're motivated to produce this podcast within a certain period of time. So there's the period of time is going to be actually a negative reinforcer in the situation. It's pressure component. It's going to force you to kind of get it done. Maybe you're really interested in the conversation because you love training and this is exciting. So that's a positive reinforcer in the situation. That's keeping you in your seat. But you could also need to use the bathroom. You could, there's all kinds of motivators that you are experiencing. Your brain is like a chorus rather than like a solo artist.
They're all competing with each other, and
so what ends up happening is that the drive state analysis is sort of summative. It's almost arithmetic. Everything pointing in one direction and other things pointing in the other direction, and the question is like, where does it sort of end up? And that's why this issue of near to neutral is really critical. So in the case of modeling or molding or manipulation, with a dog, especially that likes being touched, and likes you, those are kind of nice things, but, maybe they're also feeling a little bit of the pressure, which is slightly, negative reinforcement motive, slightly aversive motive, but, it all kind of lines up in maybe it's a net positive even for that animal, but anyways, it drives the behavior in the direction that you want, as opposed to like, rah, which is like sharp.
And that would be like your near neutral. On the motivation continuum.
The previous case,
so a lot
as
of
opposed to the sharp, which would be
a lot of that physical manipulation, if you're doing it well, is in that near neutral.
Depending
area.
on the species and how
one
they
way
see.
or the other, right?
Yeah.
It could be near neutral in the say the aversive category and or near neutral even in the appetitive category.
Yeah.
Because like you're saying, dogs find physical contact quite, or many dogs find it quite enjoyable. So.
Right. Especially if they find you enjoyable.
Yeah, there you go.
But contrast that with a bird, for example, for whom manipulation is a disaster technique most of the time.
Yep.
Birds, lots of animals don't naturally want to be touched. So if you start using a lot of physical pressure, human beings, interestingly, use manipulation on each other as a very common strategy for teaching their young or teaching anyone. I mean, think about it, hold the hand, keep coming this way. So that's a good example of that as well. I think that's why it occurs to us to do it. I can't remember what the original
question was. The next one
was
was changing the value of a motivator. So we've got the motivation continuum, now we need to know how we change that value.
The primary mechanisms that come into my head, and there's more than one, but the main ones that we talk about would be desensitization phenomenon would be driving stimulus value towards neutral. So habituation, like just exposure over time. Satiation, which is also exposure over time, but usually for something you want. So those are the two ends of the continuum. Habituation would be just getting used to something that maybe was scary. And satiation would be consuming enough of it or having enough of it that now you're ready for something else. Like no matter how much you like chocolate, you get to the end of wanting chocolate for that moment and it rebounds. But yeah, so that exposure over time. And then there is the counter conditioning capability or classical conditioning capability, which is to specifically use a stimulus of opposite value paired with whatever you're trying to change to drive the directionality. So in the case of classical conditioning, usually you think of classical conditioning going from neutral towards the other ends, because you can do classical conditioning with an aversive, and you can do classical conditioning with an attractive. And you drive that, by that association, you drive the stimulus value. You create a trigger, you can create a perception, a meaning. And the opposite, when you do place it with opposite value, so if you have something that is an aversive and you put it with an attractive, they counteract each other and drive towards neutral. And depending on the value of those two things, you can keep going. So those are the kind of primary mechanisms of modulating the value of something deliberately. Yeah.
Okay. The last question is going to be, let's see, what would be your piece of advice for everybody who's listening to this, who's working with animals as a dog trainer, as any kind of animal trainer, and what would be your one biggest piece of advice for all of them? And that's a difficult question to answer. So let's see.
Wow. Yeah, I guess if I can give you only one piece of advice, it's that prevention is easier than trying to train away from something that has developed. If of all the mistakes I made as a trainer, it was to allow behavior that I didn't want to see happen and then try to get rid of it. So I would take a look at the life of your animal and the natural things that they're going to have to experience and try really hard to skillfully and kindly and compassionately prepare them for those things, rather than try to go back and fix things that were inevitable to show up, but that you didn't prepare for. I think that's the skill set I would want you to have, and come bearing gifts.
Dr. Jenifer Zeligs, thank you for coming on to the Super Canine Show today.
Thanks very much for having me. Be well, be happy.